Whether or not a local authority or council can stop you flying your drone on their land or land they control has been something of a hot topic in the hobby ever since I started this channel. During that time, I've spoken to industry experts, interviewed airspace regulators, and consulted with legal experts. So what is the definitive answer? Is there a definitive answer? What powers does a local authority have over your drone flight? In today's video, we're going to take a closer look at what I have learned and form what is my advice to the hobby in the UK. Remember, girls, that this covers flights in the open category. Today's video will include input from our interviews with the UK CAA, the National Police Chiefs Council counter-drone team interviews, and everyone's favourite drone legal expert, the Black Belt Barrister, but more on that in a minute. It's important that we keep in mind that word advice, because one thing I've learned to be true on this subject is that there is no real definitive answer. Now, within that, there are many answers, and I've managed to find out some good information over the last couple of years that I will certainly pass on, which will help you form your own opinion based on facts. Please remember, however, that I'm just a journalist on YouTube, and I tend to find that life runs a lot better the less you listen to YouTubers. So take this information purely as intended, my advice and opinion. If you're new here and this type of drone content is of use, hit the subscribe button, because you are certainly going to want to see the content we've got coming up. And to my regulars, please hit the like button nice and early, as it really does help the channel. Before I give my advice based on the information I have gained to date, let's have a look at some of the background to this. Just over a year ago, I sat down with Jonathan Nicholson of the CAA and asked him what the CAA's view is on landowner policy, both in terms of local authority and in terms of private landowner. Let's take a listen to a short part of that interview now to hear Jonathan's thoughts. It's takeoff and landing. And looking at it from the point of view that it's almost becoming a mythology, from the point of view that, previously hobbyists never really thought about where they're taking off from the point of view of the landowner is concerned. What is the CAA's point of view regarding takeoff and landing? Obviously, the drone code now talks more about ensuring that you look for signs and that obviously, if you're stood in the middle of a national trust property, you're not supposed to take off. We know these things because they don't want that to happen on their land. But what's the CAA policy as far as how far a hobbyist should dig?
Yeah, so, actually, it's not even drone rules. So it's not drone specific, it's just standard trespass rules, really. So you're talking about private property. You need the landowner's permission to do something on private property, whether that be walking, riding a horse, flying a drone, whatever it be. If you are standing on private property and want to do something, you need the landowner's permission. So don't think about it as the airspace, think about it as where you're standing, and regardless of what it is, you need the landowner's permission to be there and do something.
Okay, so then you sort of move on from that point to the more what I would call public areas from the point of view of council land and that type of thing, and we start to get into sort of a more sort of grey area as well from the point of view that, of course, the council own that land, and many councils own land under private companies these days and have their own sort of private companies run them to maximise the return for their local constituents. Should a hobbyist, most of my flights are still as a hobbyist. If I'm about to fly in a park in somewhere, I was about to name a local authority there, but I won't be that specific, somewhere in the UK, a local park, and I'm not aware of the council's policy, there are no signs up telling me not to fly, and everything else is safe as far as Article 241, and it's a legal flight. Yeah, is that good enough as far as the CAA are concerned?
It's not our rules. So really, we're interested in, have you checked the airspace? Are you near an airfield? Distance from people, all those safety rules are really what we're interested in. Personally, myself, I would probably feel uncomfortable without knowing exactly what's going on with that land that I'm flying on. I'm a bit of a kind of safety bod, if you like. So I would want to check, but ultimately it comes down to the decision made by that person flying that drone. And that's the same for everything in aviation. There isn't a CAA inspector standing by every pilot and every air traffic controller or every maintenance engineer throughout the world. It's based on that individual's decision, having known the rules and then making a decision about safety. But in this case, it's not about safety.
Yes.
It's about land and trespass and that kind of stuff. So it's not really our rules.
Am I right, therefore, in saying that if an incident occurs, the drone crashes or hits a fence or something like that, and the CA are called in to look into it, the takeoff permission isn't something necessarily that you're going to be concerned about then?
So it might all part of the picture is about, is this a responsible person? Is this somebody who generally does the right things? So in aviation, pretty much everything we do around safety is linked to just culture. So it's really important that people feel that they can report safety incidents.
Yes.
It's not so big in the drone world at the moment, but we want to move to the place where it's equivalent with the rest of aviation. Whereas, for example, if a maintenance engineer or a pilot makes a mistake, they report it so that somebody can do something about it or learn from it. And that's really important. And that's what we call just culture. So if you've gone through the right stages, you've done the right checks, you've done everything that you could reasonably expect it to do, and something still happens, then just culture may well come in and go, well, actually, you did everything that could be expected of.
Okay, so here, Jonathan, is pretty clear. Aside from bylaws in place to prevent drone flight specifically, the issue of takeoff location and the issue surrounding preventing your drone flight is not one of airspace or drone regulation at all. This is a stance backed up by the UK Drone Code, the official source of information for recreational pilots of the open category in the UK. Section 8 states, follow any flying restrictions and check for hazards. And it talks about examples of restrictions and hazards, and this may include bylaws. Bylaws may restrict when you can fly and where you can fly from. The code states that you should look out for local signs for information and contact details where you can find out more. Bylaws are unlikely to be shown on apps or drone websites, so don't expect to see them on things like Drone Assist. This is one of the first parts of key information. If you are flying from a location where a bylaw exists, particularly areas such as local parks, then you should expect to see a notice board explaining that there are restrictions on that land based on the bylaws which are in place. Should a simple sign be posted in the corner of a piece of land stating no drone use, but that sign does not state which law backs up that statement, usually appearing in one of the corners referring to the bylaw itself, then it is probably simply a policy of the landowner rather than something which can actually prevent overflight, certainly. In fact, bylaws which prevent overflights are extremely rare and often only control where you can take off from. So how does this work in practice? If you're out flying your drone and you are flying from an area which you feel is probably public land or land that you have free access to and there are no signs informing you that you should not be flying in the area, then unless approached to be told otherwise, your flight is probably perfectly legal, subject of course to following all of the drone rules in place. So how about trespass? How does this come into your drone flight, and can a drone flying over someone's property be deemed trespass here in the UK? Here I would turn to Daniel over at Black Belt Barrister, who is a barrister of England and Wales, who also runs a highly successful YouTube channel discussing a wide range of subjects in the legal sphere. There's a link in the description to his channel, but he has also very kindly allowed us to play this clip from his video talking about this specific issue. Again, there's a link in the description to the full video.
Is it trespass to be flying your drone over someone else's property? And the short answer is no. There was a case a long time ago in 1977 called Burstein and Skyviews, where in this case the defendant company took aerial photographs of properties and then offered them back to the house owner for sale. The claimant in this case complained on two grounds. First of all, that it was trespass, and secondly, that the photographs were taken without consent and it was an invasion of privacy, and that this was only obtained by way of trespass into the airspace above his property. As part of his claim, he demanded that the negatives of the photographs were either destroyed or handed over. But the judge held that there was no trespass because a landowner only has rights to any airspace to such a height that is necessary and essential for ordinary use of that land, and they don't have any control or rights over the airspace beyond that height above their property. And further, the judge held that even if there was a trespass in this case, that there wouldn't be any remedy in relation to the photos because there was no law against taking a photograph, and the taking of a photograph could not turn an act which was not trespass into any other kind of trespass. So obviously there's going to be a balance to be had here. If you were, say, hovering hovering your drone above somebody's property and deliberately trying to see into a discrete area of the property, that might well give rise to the reasonable expectation of privacy, and a court might find that there's an invasion to that privacy in that situation. But if the drone is just flying overhead, taking aerial photographs of the general area, no one is going to have any general claim in trespass or against the photographs or films taken.
So you can hear from the clip of Daniel's video, trespass is something which you're unlikely to fall foul of under normal safe drone flights. Certainly looking at the policies of local authorities and private companies who state that you must not fly your drone over their land, then there doesn't appear to be any legal basis for this to be the case. Again, this does not give you carte blanche to start flying your drone and looking inside people's windows or hovering over a property, that type of thing. This really is guidance for safe, normal drone flight. So far in this video, we have found out that the CAA do not see themselves as the appropriate authority to regulate where you can take off from, and instead ask that you take reasonable steps to ensure your takeoff location is legal. From the Black Belt Barrister, we hear an opinion that a drone is unlikely to be committing trespass when flown over private land. Where does this leave us, however, in terms of local authorities, councils' policy, and whether or not that in itself is anyway enforceable? Well, here again, we're lucky enough to be permitted to play another clip from the Black Belt Barrister within a video entitled "Can a Council Ban Drones?" Let's listen to the clip.
So given that the CAA has the authority to regulate UK airspace and has already done so in relevant legislation, I was interested to find out whether anyone had looked into local authority policies to see whether they were consistent with existing legislation, again for reasons that I'm going to come back to afterwards. So in that respect, my research turned up a fellow barrister's article, Richard Ryan, which I will link in the description. Feel free to tell him that I gave him a shout out. And together with a colleague, he said that their research showed of over 350 local authorities either do not have a policy in place with regard to drones, or if they do, it is not consistent with CAA regulations. And to quote Mr. Ryan, he says, "We did not find a single policy that was accurate, up to date, or enforceable." So ultimately, as Mr. Ryan says, and I agree, it is only a matter of time before one of these cases comes to court to challenge the authority of a local authority to create a bylaw that effectively contradicts or conflicts with CAA regulations in the banning of drones in that area, when the CAA has already created regulations by which, if you comply, you should really be able to fly that drone anywhere, so long as you comply with the regulations and you don't fly in any restricted areas, quite obviously such as airports. So what is the significance of all of this? Well, the two things you remember that I said would come back to were judicial review and ultra vires. Ultra vires meaning beyond power or beyond authority. So if a public body makes a decision that it did not have the authority to make, it is beyond their power, which will render it invalid and unenforceable.
Thank you again to Daniel, the Black Belt Barrister, for allowing us to play his clips within this video. There are links to his channel in the description, along with a link to the article by Richard Ryan that is mentioned in the clip that we played. So within that one video clip, we essentially gained the opinion of two barristers that many of the policies stated by local councils are simply not enforceable. In an effort to further back this position and to clarify the real-world implications of this, during our recent interview with the National Police Chiefs Council drone team, we asked them whether or not the police would enforce council policy and at what stage police would take action over a drone takeoff position and how that all really works. Let's watch this clip from that interview. What are your thoughts in terms of things like local authorities having blanket bans on drone use from a takeoff and land permission?
I think the easiest thing is there is we don't have thoughts. We'll give you the legal position on that, okay? Because we're not going to get dragged into personal thoughts. The legal stance is they don't own the airspace. The airspace is open. Let's keep that nice and simple. So if there's a bylaw that specifically prohibits use of a drone, then absolutely. Obviously you can't fly. But these bylaws vary, don't they, in terms of the description?
They do.
They are scattered around the UK. You probably wouldn't even think there was a bylaw there. So I think certainly check when you go out. So yeah, just make sure that obviously that bylaw is in place or is not in place. And
it's specific to drone use as well,
Yeah,
of course, multi-rotor drone use.
It's a takeoff position, which is important, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if that that land is owned by someone, then and they say you can't, then you can't. But there's nothing to stop you from going elsewhere and taking off, and
Yes.
then you can fly over that.
for you to answer as police officers. I'm a drone hobbyist, and I'm going to go and fly in my local town. I've got to the location. I've looked around. There's no sign saying, as the CAA drone code says, keep an eye out for signs, especially in parks and things that say no drones. And of course, if I saw something like that, I wouldn't fly. But I then take off with my drone, and I've actually got no idea that local authority has a general blanket ban on drones, or how that's enforced, or is this bit of land owned by them, is this bit not owned, and that type of thing. What's the situation in terms of enforcement from the point of view that at that point I'm taking off from land where somewhere there's a piece of paper in the ether saying they don't want me to? Is that something which the police would look to necessarily enforce straight away?
No, not straight away. There'd be, there'd be, when I say investigation, that's a big word, but that's what we do when we look into things. We look into it. So if we have that, if we get called by the council saying that someone's flying a drone, and then we have that interaction with yourself and say, did you know you're not supposed to be flying a drone here? Well, actually I didn't, and what checks did you do to find that out? Well, I did this and this, and I couldn't find any of it. So we do now know that you can't fly your drone here, and if it's like, well, I'm really sorry about it, I'll go fly somewhere else. Then, for me personally, that's end of story, because it's been done. If you continue to just go around the corner and fly your drone again in the same position, then that's going to be another story, isn't it?
You cross the other side of the park or something. Yeah,
but if you say, I'm really sorry about that, I really didn't know, and you haven't been causing danger or all the other issues, then let's have that chat, and then that's education piece, isn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed,
and
exactly.
And we won't be told by other people how to enforce.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's not council going to say you've got to do. No. Yeah. As Dad said, we have discretion.
So in loosest terms, then, because a local authority has a policy somewhere that says we do not want drones taking off from council land, that isn't some kind of thing that's going to say I'm going to get arrested.
It needs to be
automatically.
Absolutely not. No, and you'll often see a lot of signs that says no drones around here. That has to be supported from a legal perspective to be able to enforce it. And if it's not there, can you prevent the drone? No. Can you ask someone to not fly? Absolutely. They don't own the land. They don't own the airspace. So again, it's that conversation as Steve said.
Yeah, unless it is private property.
Yes.
They own that.
Yes.
Then they say, we do not want you taken off or landing on our property, then you can't.
Next, I want to talk briefly about Public Space Protection Orders, PSPOs. If you've been watching Geeksvana just before the holiday break, you might have seen our live show we hosted on this topic. If not, there's a link in the description to that as well. This is currently a little bit of an elephant in the room, where local councils are adding drone use to a list of prohibited activities because they deem them a nuisance. You should check if your local council has an active PSPO and if drones are on there. If so, you could be subject to warning letters, notices, fines, and the worst case scenario, a criminal record. However, how enforceable PSPOs are against drone flight is something of a debate in itself. One recent case against a commercial operator has been withdrawn by a council, who are now reviewing their order based on the current drone legislation. So we will have more on that specific topic fairly soon on the channel. However, one piece of advice I can give you now is that it is highly unlikely you'll be required to give your personal information to a park ranger or a council official. So if you are presented with someone requesting it to issue a warning, personally I would simply walk away. However, if you do get a warning notice, take advice straight away, as it is essential you take action as soon as you humanly can. Time really is of vital importance. So taking all this information together, including other conversations that I've had with regulator, law enforcement and legal advisors, what would be the advice that I would give, the simple advice that I would give my fellow drone flyers? Put simply as I possibly can, my main message would be not to fear going out and enjoying the hobby. Take steps and make reasonable inquiries as to whether or not you're able to fly your drone from a piece of land, but also do not stop yourself from flying from areas which are obviously and probably public land. Focus instead on ensuring that your drone flight is safe. The legal responsibility in this is actually essentially outside of the drone flight itself, and very much the legal responsibility we follow in our everyday lives. I would always try to ensure that my daily activities are legal and that I'm not trespassing on someone's land or doing something they wouldn't want me to happen on that land, etc. But beyond that, I would look to enjoy my day and carry out my legal activities. If you are approached by an officer or a representative of a landowner, be that the local council or a private business, then my personal advice to you would be to follow their instructions in terms of not taking off from their land. However, if you're more confident and you are taking off from a location which is not under their direct control and your flight is perfectly legal, what you then do in terms of arguing that point and correcting or confronting them in terms of correcting that opinion is of course down to your own personal choice and outlook on life. Personally, I think it is a sketchy road for the hobby to start too many fights with landowners, but that's just my opinion. Here in the UK, there is still only one authority that regulates your drone flights, and that is the CAA. The enforcement of those rules are deferred to the police. However, a simple policy devised by a local council or company that seeks to control flights on or over their land is just that. It's a policy. It does not have any criminal enforcement, and in all likelihood, dependent on the outcome of any confrontation, of course, it's likely to remain a civil matter. We should remember, however, that in my opinion, we do have a responsibility to each other in the hobby. How we react and the way the public view us is important at the moment, with so many looking to curtail hobby drone use. I suppose what I'm saying here is that just because you can legally do something, try to assess it in terms of the PR damage that that flight or action could create as well. In my opinion, it doesn't matter which law we hide behind as drone pilots. If enough of the public don't like something, then changes will happen. The simple fact that much of this is yet to be tested in court, to me, tells me that although we have legislation in place which covers both trespass and airspace use, this is still a subject matter that can cause a lot of confusion. However, the simple fact remains that if a drone flight is legal, if a drone flight is safe, then there is no policy that can justifiably seek to blanket ban the use of drones. So get out there and enjoy your drones. Keep spreading the good word about the hobby and promote the safe use of drones through demonstrating responsible and safe flight yourself. Sean out.